So on March 11th of 2011, there was an earthquake which caused a tsunami. The tsunami struck the eastern coast of Japan and flooded the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant to a depth of about 25 feet. So the power plant had been designed to withstand water up to 15 feet. So, obviously it was above and beyond what the designers of the power plant had planned for. The earthquake was, very, very large earthquake, very close to the coast of Japan. And so the tsunami was much larger than anything that they would have imagined hitting that power plant. So when the tsunami hit the power plant lost electricity, and unfortunately the diesel generators, which were supposed to kick in and provide backup power to the power plant, were also underwater. So they couldn't provide the electricity needed to run the pumps that pump cooling water into the power plant. So when the cooling water could no longer be circulated, what cooling water was in contact with the core of the plant, and most importantly with the spent fuel, where the spent fuel is stored, that cooling water evaporated, and there was no way to bring new cooling water in to replace it. So without the cooling water to help maintain the temperature, the reactor and the spent fuel overheated, and those can reach temperatures in excess of a few thousand degrees Celsius if they're not properly cooled. That's why they call it a meltdown. So once the fuel heats up and the reactor heats up to that temperature, you're melting everything. You're melting concrete, you're melting steel, you're melting bedrock like butter. As the meltdown proceeded, one of the many consequences of that meltdown is that there was a release of particulates into the atmosphere, and those particulates carried with them radioactive cesium. That's one of the byproducts of nuclear fission. So the prevailing winds carried those particulates inland from the coast, and as those particulates settled to Earth, the cesium that they were carrying with them got deposited on the surface of the soil and created a contamination issue downwind of the plant. So I'm currently investigating a method of remediating the cesium from the soil. One of the difficult problems with this issue is that the clays that they have in Japan, in that region of Japan, they tend to bind chemicals like cesium very, very tightly. So the cesium gets held so tightly by these clay minerals that you can't remove the cesium easily through normal chemical types of remediation technologies. So the Japanese government has removed the top layer of the soil that contained the majority of the cesium contamination, and they're currently storing it at a temporary storage facility with really no good plans for how to get the cesium out. Depending on who you ask, some chemists will tell you that once the cesium gets bound to the clay minerals in the way that it is, it's actually a permanent part of the mineral structure now and cannot be removed. So this presents the Japanese government with a pretty tough situation because they've got an enormous amount of this radioactive soil and no good way to dispose of it. So what I'm working on is a way to use plants to remove that cesium from the soil, and what we're hopeful of is that the plants will be successful at removing that cesium where our technologies fail. So what we're going to do here in my lab is we are going to create an artificial cesium-contaminated soil using the non-radioactive isotope of cesium. So there's different kinds of cesium. Some isotopes of cesium are radioactive. some isotopes of cesium are not radioactive. So we're using the non-radioactive isotope of cesium here as part of our research, but because it's still chemically identical to the radioactive cesium, what we learn using the non-radioactive isotope of cesium should translate to dealing with the radioactive isotope of cesium that they have in Japan. So we're still in the preliminary stages of the research. Right now, what we are looking at is we're looking at, first of all, showing that we can recreate the conditions in Japan in the lab. And then we are studying the interaction between cesium and the vermiculite so that we can better understand kind of the basic chemistry of how the cesium and the vermiculite are reacting with each other so that we can then better understand how to get the cesium out. For more information about the environmental science program at Kennesaw State University, you can go to www.kennesaw.edu/ES.